This is lesson 2.26, Gender and Resistance in Slave Narratives. Today we'll be exploring the unique difficulties facing enslaved women as objects of sexual abuse and exploitation and the ways they resisted. We'll especially be looking at the narratives they published to tell their stories and raise public awareness of the horrors of slavery, and the way these stories help drive forward the political movements of abolition and women's rights. So we'll start by defining slave narratives as a literary genre. Slave narratives were first-hand accounts of the suffering of individuals under slavery. They often detailed heinous physical and sexual abuse. In many cases, they revealed details of daring escapes and explained how the author learned to read and write. All of them emphasize the humanity of enslaved people and aim to advance the political cause of abolition by raising public awareness of the disgraceful injustices of the slave system. Of course, we have already learned about one famous narrative of this sort, The Interesting Life of Olaudah Equiano, in which the author revealed the horrors of the Middle Passage. Another famous slave narrative is the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, which had a huge impact on the U.S. abolition movement when it was published in 1845. But although some of the most famous of these narratives were authored by men, enslaved women published their own stories, which revealed the distinct challenges facing enslaved women in a country where children inherited their status from their mother. In 19th century society, humanity and dignity had different meanings for men and women, and this is reflected in slave narratives. While narratives written by enslaved men often emphasized autonomy and manhood, those written by women focused on domestic life, modesty, and family, especially the cruel effects of family separation caused by the commodification of enslaved women and their children. Narratives by formerly enslaved black women also frequently detailed sexual exploitation at the hands of slaveholders, which was the rule, not the exception, in southern states where laws against rape did not apply to enslaved women. Enslaved women resisted sexual abuse by fighting their attackers, running away with their children, and inducing abortion with medicinal plants. In some cases, they even resorted to infanticide, killing the child to prevent it from falling into the slaveholder's possession. Two women's stories, which we will look at in the sources for this lesson, exemplify the uniquely difficult circumstances faced by enslaved women. The first is the story of Mary Prince, who was enslaved in the British colony of Bermuda. She published her narrative in 1831, relating the emotional distress she endured when she was sold and separated from her family. Her book was the first autobiography of a black woman in England, and it sold out 3 printings, becoming a seminal part of the growing abolition movement there. In the United States, a woman from North Carolina named Harriet Jacobs published her own narrative in 1860, in which she described ongoing sexual abuse at the hands of her enslaver, Dr. James Norcom. Eventually, Norcom's unwanted sexual advances drove Jacobs to go into hiding, and for an astonishing 7 years, she survived in a tiny attic crawl space, deprived of fresh air or light, and was only able to come out briefly for exercise in the middle of the night. The details of Harriet Jacobs' story are shocking, and her narrative advanced the causes of abolition and feminism in the U.S., just as Mary Prince's had in England.